Work Wellness Institute is transforming research into workplace performance and health. As an organization, we function throughout the complete cycle of turning research into practice, mobilizing knowledge as a research institute, community partner, funder, and educational provider. Our mission of creating safe, healthy, and inclusive workplaces for all is our driving motivation. Learning is a lifelong journey to adapt to the forever changing needs of the workplace. Whether you are a leader, a professional, an academic, or a student, we provide high-quality resources that are evidence-based, topical, and relevant to all industries. Choose the Work Wellness Institute as your learning journey partner and become a member to gain full access to our diverse knowledge mobilization programming, including lectures on demand, e-curriculum, 3 distinct certification opportunities, and more. Continue to learn and connect with the Work Wellness Institute and see how we can support transforming research into performance and health for your workplace.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us in today's webinar, whether it might be the morning, afternoon, or evening to you. So once again, thank you for taking the time and joining us today for our session, Navigating Disability Accommodation Complexity, a Tool to Measure It. My name is Elizabeth White, and I am the Manager of Programs with the Work Wellness Institute, and I'll be hosting and helping and moderating today's webinar. I would like to start by acknowledging that I have the privilege to live and work on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations. This webinar is made possible through the support of our funders, partners, as well as memberships to the Work Wellness Institute. And we would also like to take a moment to thank our advisory committee and, of course, our speakers who contribute to this webinar series. I'm very excited to move right into our main event today and to welcome Shahin with us today. And Shahin is the Human Resources Manager at ERP College in Calgary, Alberta, holding CPHR and SHRM-CP designations. He has earned a Master's of Science in Human Resources Management and Labor Relations from the University of Lethbridge, an MBA in the Human Resources Management, and a BBA in Management from the University of Dhaka. With over 6 years of research experiences, he specializes in disability accommodation, employee motivation, turnover, diversity management, stress management, occupational health and safety, leadership, and organizational innovation. His work has been published in reputable journals, including the International Journal of Manpower and Work, a journal of prevention, assessment, and rehabilitation. So we're in very good hands today as I turn the table over to you, and thank you again for spending time with us today for this presentation.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for handing over the presentation. So welcome and thank you for joining everyone on this webinar, Navigating Accommodation Complexity, a Tool to Measure It. Today, we'll explore the key insights into why disability accommodation complexity matters and how organizations can better navigate the disability complexity based on our research. The name of our research was developing a tool for disability accommodation complexity, a sequential mix study. So our session will highlight factors that contributes to disability accommodation complexity and introduce a newly developed disability accommodation complexity scale. This tool is designed to help organizations and managers to make well-informed decisions, allocate resources effectively, and enhance workplace inclusivity. By the end of this webinar, I hope that you will have a deeper understanding of disability accommodation complexity and how to measure it. So let's start it. So as I think Elizabeth already given a broader description about me. So I'm a HR manager at ERP College in Calgary. And this research was conducted with collaboration with Dr. Dagjang Shin. He is an associate professor at Korea University in Seoul, South Korea. He was the second author for this research paper. I worked with him in this paper when he was serving as an assistant professor at the University of Lethbridge. He was my teacher. I called him my research guru. So he substantially helped to conduct this research and until the publication. So now, what we are going to discuss today. First of all, this is the agenda for the webinar today. In section 1, I'm going to provide a research overview, how we conducted the research, what is about it, what is the purpose of this research at the beginning. So in section 2, I'm going to give a quick overview about Canadian disability accommodation situation right now. In section 3, I'm going to discuss about the disability accommodation complexity and its importance, why you will care about it. And section 4, I'm going to discuss about the factors that made disability accommodation complex for 335 supervisors. As I want to mention that we developed this scale based on the real life experience of 335 supervisors or manager who had recent disability accommodation experience. So we will share this experience of the supervisors, while we will also discuss about the complexity scale that we developed and proposed in section 5. Finally, we will wrap up this session with with describing benefit of the disability accommodation complexity measurement scale. Now, section 1, research overview that produced the research finding as well as the disability accommodation complexity scale. So our research named was disability, so developing a tool for disability accommodation complexity, a sequential mixed approach. The reason for sequential, because we conducted 3 research to develop and validate the tool. So we aimed to explore the disability complexity factors based on the managers or supervisors view who have recent disability accommodation experience. And then we constructed the disability complexity scale relying on the disability accommodation complexity factors that we developed in our first research based on the experience of the managers or supervisors. Then after developing, we wanted to pre-test and test to validate the complexity scale. And finally, we did another testing and pre-test testing with another study, third study, to understand that how it works in another study in terms of validation. And we also wanted to examine the relationship between disability accommodation complexity and different workplace variables that are relevant in this context to understand the functional validity of our scale that we are proposing. So now I wanted to give you a research methodology overview of the research methodology to understand the robustness of our work, how we conducted. As I mentioned, that we conducted 3 research to develop this scale. In first study, we did a qualitative research. The purpose of this research was to explore the disability accommodation complexity factors. So our sample size was 335 supervisors or managers with recent disability accommodation experience. And we recruited these supervisors or managers from UK, USA, Canada, Dutch, Germany, and Australia. And we used a thematic approach for analyzing the qualitative data they given us based on their experience. I wanted to mention that the reason we recruited the respondents or supervisors from 6 countries, because these countries has the same regulatory framework for the disability accommodation management in macro and micro level. So in study 2 and 3 were designed to test the scale, because we already constructed this scale in the first study based on the supervisor's experience. So in study 2, it was a quantitative study. We tested the disability accommodation complexity scale that we constructed from first study. And the sample of this research was 303 supervisors from the same countries. And we use structural equation modeling for testing and validating the scale we proposed. And in the final study, we tested again the scale with separate set of data to understand its reliability and sustainability in a separate study. And we also tested the relationship, functional validity of the research, functional validity of the scale by understanding the relationship between disability accommodation complexity and different workplace variables. In this study, we recruited 304 supervisors again for recent disability, who have the recent disability accommodation experience, and we recruited them from the same countries. And similarly, we use the structural equation modeling for testing the scale, and for functional validity test, we used a hierarchical regression to understand the relationship between disability accommodation complexity and workplace variables. Now, I wanted to give a quick facts about what is the current situation of Canadian disability accommodation. So now, in Canada, the right to accommodation is a protected ground under all human rights law as well as the labor laws. And this means that individuals with disabilities in Canada are entitled to the necessary adjustment to allow them to fully participate in the workplaces. According to the statistics, according to the 2022 Statistics Canada survey, 27% of Canadians aged between 15 to 64 have some sort of disabilities. Encouragingly, 62% of these individuals are employed in the labor market. It's a huge portion of our demographics and population in Canada who are disabled, and they're in our workplace and labor market. However, we have also seen that significant increase in disability among young Canadians, particularly 15 to 24 years old. It's a rise from 13% to 20% from 2017 to 2022. This shift underscores the growing importance of workplace accommodation and inclusive policies. Despite the legal protections and organization policies and an increasing number of individuals with disability in the workforce, many organizations still struggle to effectively implement disability accommodation measures and increase the disability accommodation efficiency as well as return to work. This underscores the gap between policy, practice, and real-life situation, leaving many employees without support they need to thrive in the workplace. Our work is one of the many efforts from our scholarly work who does the researches in disability accommodation to improve the situation in disability accommodation in the workplaces. In the next slides, I would request you to participate in a survey to guess what percentage of disability at work you feel are failed or unmet in Canada. Yes, I think that's Elizabeth, it's absolutely correct. Most of our respondents, 52% respondents has said that, I have said that it's 41 to 60% of disabilities are in Canadian work environment fails. Yes, it's absolutely correct. And I want to give you the answer here in the skill. Right answer was a 41 to 60% disability accommodation are unmet or failed in Canadian workplace. So that means that organizations are losing a lot of money and they're losing their efficiency to return to work, because if someone is facing disability and they are not accommodated, organization lose productivity that or around billions for Canadian workplace and labor market for every year. So we want to go to the next session right now. The next session is that we will discuss about disability accommodation complexity, why it's important. So in theory, disability accommodation complexity refers to the degree of difficulty and efforts required to implement a reasonable workplace adjustment for the employees with disability. So theory also indicated that while we were developing our literature, it says that the complexity of disability can be characterized by multiple medical restrictions the employee with disability have, lack of structures and standardization. It also includes the policy and processes placed in the organization to accommodate people with disabilities, and uncertain medical condition, difficult task modifications, involvement of other department and parties, lack of skills of supervisors, and finally the resources, because managing disability requires different resources at workplaces. Sometimes it's not available. That's why disability can be complex. Now, why understanding disability accommodation is important? It's very important because if you understand the complexity of disability, of a disability accommodation, then it will improve your decision. By understanding the complexity of decision analysis, you can optimize the decision models and reduce uncertainty and increase the return to work. And second is resource allocation. So if you understand the disability accommodation complexity, then it will allow you for better allocation of time, money, and efforts, ensuring efficient problem solving while you are managing the disability accommodation. And it will improve the success of disability accommodation at your workplace. And risk mitigation. If you know the complexity, it will reduce your risk, particularly the complex decisions associated with disability accommodation often involve multiple factors and uncertainties. Proper analysis of disability accommodation complexity will definitely help you in identifying risk early and address them proactively, and it will reduce its impact on the result of disability accommodation interventions and effects you are taking. Scalability. So disability, we found that disability is a very risky process as well as time-consuming, costly process. So you have to be proactive, and you have to be you have to be you have to have the scalability. So if you find that a disability accommodation you are given to accommodate, then you have to find out the complexity associated with this. What are the potential impact this complexity can have on your disability accommodation process? In that case, you will be, if you understand, if you measure the complexity properly, then you will be able to design decision frameworks that can be applied to different scenarios, from simple to highly complex problems that you face during the disability accommodation. And it will help you to put the appropriate measure and right time and change your intervention if it is necessary. And it will ultimately affect the success of disability accommodation, and you will be able to increase the rate of return to work in your workplace. So finally, the communication. Disability is an additional work for the organization and the supervisors and managers. So we know that organizations' main purpose is to minimize the operations cost so that they can maximize their profit. So most of the time, supervisors or any person who is appointed for disability accommodation management, they need resources to accommodate. But management or other departments who is responsible for allocating the budgets or money might not be convinced that you need some sort of budgets or resources to facilitate the disability accommodation. But if you can properly assess the disability accommodation complexity, and based on the result, if you can create a case based on the fact, real life fact, then it will help you to build a strong case for the related parties, particularly the top management and people who are involved with extending budget. That's yes, if I want to manage this disability, I need this amount of resources. So you can justify and communicate the disability complexity or the seriousness of the particular case to your management and related parties, and that will make your funding achievement easier and make ultimately help you to reduce your stress and make your disability accommodation successful. So now we used a different approach to disability in our research to develop this disability accommodation complexity scale. In our research, we applied more neutral approach because most of the researchers in disability world shows that they focus mainly on the people with disability. It makes them to see as a problem. So but we do not believe that this skewed approach or narrow approach can properly equip our managers and supervisors who are dealing with this, can keep the proper resources and tactics and strategies or ideas or knowledge that they can manage this disability and reduce the stress on related stakeholders. So we used a neutral approach and holistic approach to explore the disability complexity rather than focusing on the people with disability, and developed a skill that can reduce the complexity and increase the planning process of disability accommodation and enhance the success of disability. Particularly, disability, we view disability accommodation complexity as an organizational challenge, a shared responsibility that requires practical solutions. Instead of placing the burden on, we also make sure that instead of placing the burden on people with disability, we used a neutral approach and explored what structure, what procedures, and what contextual factors shape disability accommodation complexity, and what are their effects. We also highlighted managers as supervisors rather than the people with disability who are directly responsible for implementing disability accommodations and face the real life complexity and challenges in doing so. Next, so in this section, we are going to share the findings that we found from our research, particularly related to the factors that made the disability accommodation complex for the 335 supervisors who we investigated in our research. These are the real feedback from the real people who manage the disability accommodation, and they given that's what made their disability accommodation complex. So they identified 12 factors that made their most recent disability accommodation complex. As we know, that physical environmental change is a common intervention made by the organization or the supervisors or managers to accommodate a person with disability. We found that 39 supervisors cited that their disability accommodation was complex because the disability accommodation required substantial physical environmental change. And some said that it was difficult, that physical environmental changes required by the disability accommodation was difficult to manage. And most importantly, most of the supervisors said that their last disability accommodation was complex because it was very costly to manage the environmental change required. Second, factors they identified: communication style change. In certain situations, like if someone loses their voice or hearing ability or vision, they cannot communicate in the regular way. But the changing the communication style is one of the most important factor that made 32 supervisors disability accommodation complex. Particularly, their people with disability at work required change to the regular communication style, and this communication style change was difficult to manage, and to adapt. So people with disability and the others in the workplace found it difficult to adapt to this communication style change. Because of that, their disability accommodation was complex. The next factor was job responsibility change and modification. We know that for accommodating disability at work, we need to change most commonly, we need to change job responsibility or modification. But 30 supervisors said that their disability accommodation was complex because the people with disability could not perform their regular job duties, as well as they required substantial responsibility modification that was very hard for them to manage. In that case, their disability became complex. Not only that, sometimes it's necessary to change the position, create an alternative position for the employees with disabilities because they can no longer perform in their current position. So we found 16 supervisors cited that it was complex because it required an alternative positions that was very difficult to manage, and it was not readily available during the system, because we understand that organization doesn't keep the spare resources by thinking that someone will face some sort of disabilities. And big corporation may have such spare resources to cover during the disability accommodation, or they might have the alternative position. But most of the mid-size and small organization might face the difficulty to create a position alternative. And that was reflected on the interview we did with these 16 supervisors. Next factor is flexibility. We know that accommodation requires flexibility at work, but 22 supervisors suggested that their disability accommodation became complex because the people with disability required substantial flexibility and required a multiple flexibility at a time. And sometimes they require flexibility that are not available and flexibility that are not easy to manage. So these are the factors they mentioned that made their disability accommodation complex in terms of flexibility. The next factor made their disability accommodation complex, their accommodation complex, It was the resources. We know that for accommodating disabilities, we need resources, but 69 supervisors say that required resources were not readily available, and lack of funds to manage the accommodation resources, lack of effective disability accommodation policy. These are the resources were missing, or they are not readily available. That's why their disability accommodation were complex. Co-worker support. We know that for a successful disability accommodation, co-worker support is very important. 51 supervisors say that because of the lack of cooperation of co-workers in the disability accommodation process, for example, whatever intervention they are putting for accommodating the person with disability, they were not cooperative. The co-workers were not cooperative. And on the top of that, some supervisors also say that they not only do not cooperate in the disability accommodation process, but also they are not cooperative for supporting employee with disability when they are being accommodated. So there is different reason they mentioned that's why they become non-cooperative during this time. But supervisors, 51 supervisors cited that because of the lack of cooperation from the co-workers, their disability accommodation are complex. Management support. For disability accommodation, management support is a very important part, because if management doesn't support, nothing can happen in an organization. So 22 supervisors say that the management support, the disability accommodation required were substantial, that was hard to manage. As well as some supervisors said that they required maybe a substantial or minimum, but the support from the top management were not there while they were managing disability accommodation. That's why these supervisors say that their disability accommodation was complex. The next factor, employees' knowledge and cooperation level. 20 supervisors cited that the people with disabilities who are being accommodated did not provide sufficient could not show sufficient understanding of their condition that made their disability accommodation complex. Additionally, some supervisors also mentioned that the cooperation required by the people with disability to accommodate them were not there. That's why their disability accommodation are complex. And some supervisors also mentioned that their disability accommodation was complex because the person with disability concealed their condition, and fully they didn't express their condition fully, or they didn't express their condition for accommodation before. That's why it became harder for them to accommodate during that time. And it's some sort of non-cooperation, but concealing this condition made their disability accommodation process even harder. So supervisors' ability, experience, and perception. This was another area the supervisors faced the complexity in their recent disability that we interviewed with. So a supervisor is the central stakeholder in a disability accommodation, because they manages the disability accommodation while they also deal with the disruption or anything or lacking that is being caused because of the disability accommodation. So 22 supervisors cited that lack of ability to understand the condition of people with disability and accurately assess disability accommodation needs, or to make decisions about disability accommodation made their disability accommodation complex. For example, one of the supervisors said that I don't have the ability to understand the condition of a cancer survivor. So I was not given any training or resources to overcome my ability gap. So because of that, my disability accommodation became complex, and did not, some supervisors say this, they did not have previous experience in disability for a particular condition. That's why their disability accommodation was complex, because they had to figure out everything one by one. They had to go through trial and error while they're dealing with a human, which is a very complex and sensitive area. So that's why their disability accommodation was very complex. Some supervisors also mentioned this. I didn't like this person with disabilities because of several reasons related to the disability or outside of the disability. So I felt that I was not engaged from inside. So that's why it was hard for me to connect with the task of accommodating employees with disability and understanding their conditions properly. So it made my disability accommodation process complex. So one of the biggest factor that when someone gets disabled and there is no spare resources to covered them. Then organization faced performance reduction and workflow disruption. 17 supervisors say that performance of the employee with disability was severely affected by their condition, and substantially disrupted the entire workflow of the group by creating a process bottleneck and extensive workload for other workers. It was challenging to find a substitute who covered the productivity goals, and that the employee with disability could no longer meet. So because of performance reduction for these reasons and work disruption, their disability accommodation was complex because the supervisors or manager needed to deal with the performance reduction and workforce disruption while they were supposed to manage the disability accommodation to make it successful. The final the final factor is nature of disability. So 24 supervisors cited that their disability accommodation was managed because of the nature of the disability. Particularly, some supervisors say that their disability accommodation was more challenging to accommodate employees with disability because the disability condition was psychological. He said that if it would be physical disability, that it would be easier, but because the nature of the disability was psychological, that's why it was complex. Some supervisors also say that I dealt with a employee with disability who has a condition of an unpredictable and progressive condition. I could not put any specific intervention. I could not rely on a specific intervention, or I could not. I would be always in an uncertainty whether this intervention will be working because the person with disability had a condition with that was unpredictable and progressive in nature. Some of the supervisors also say that my last disability person with my last disability accommodation was complex because the person had multiple disability that required separate and often conflicting medication. So one of them given an example that someone was feeling low as well as they had a diabetes. So he had a diabetics, and he had a progressive and unpredictable condition. So in that situation, if you would take more carb for energizing themselves, so it would be conflicting with their diabetic condition. So it was very complex for that person to manage. So these are the 12 factors that made the disability accommodation complex for the 335 supervisors or managers we interviewed who have recent disability accommodation experiences in our research. Now, based on these 12 factors, we developed our disability accommodation complex. We constructed our disability complexity scale. So, but in our research, we find that we wanted to make 12 dimension or subscales for analyzing these 12 factors that supervisors mentioned that made their disability accommodation complex. But statistics in our research told that no, these 29 factors, 29 items that we constructed to measure doesn't fit with these 12 factors. It fits with 9 factors. That's why our disability complexity scale includes 9 dimensions or subscales, including the complexity associated with the required physical environmental change, required communication style change, required job modification or change, and required resources, required social support, lack of supervisors' own support, lack of managers or supervisors' ability, and enhanced disruption and complex nature of disability. These are all subscales or dimensions we have in our scale. As I mentioned that we interviewed 335 supervisors who mentioned there are 12 factors, who identified 12 factors that makes their disability accommodation complex. But when we went for developing the scale, we found that these 12 factors fit in 9 dimensions or subscale. If you see that these 9 dimensions have 29 items to measure. From first, if you see that physical environmental change was measured by 3 items, communication style change was measured by 2 items, job modification and or change was measured by 6 items, and resource area was measured by 3 items, and social support was by 4 items, and employees own support was measured by 3 items. Again, next was managers or supervisors ability, that was measured by 3, and disruption was measured by 2, and complex nature was measured by 3. So this was not from our side, so it is what data told when we put them in structural equation modeling in the statistics. So now I am going to give you a brief description about the all dimensions and subscale, how you will score and measure the subscales. So first dimension or subscale was physical complexity associated with the physical environmental change. How you're going to measure it? So as we mentioned, that it has 3 items. First one, level of physical environmental change you require, level of difficulty some supervisors or manager face to manage the change, as well as cost of physical environmental change required to accommodate. So we proposed a scale, Likert scale with 5 items, where it will start from very low to very high, and it will score from 1 to 5. So in these dimension or subscale, when you apply in your workplace, then if the score is a 3, then it will represent the lowest score or insignificant complexity associated with a particular disability accommodation for physical environmental change. But if it is 15, then it's highest scale, and you should take it very seriously. So next scale, subscale or dimension 2 was communication style change. So our statistics suggested that 2 items are enough to measure this, measure the complexity associated with communication style change. So first one is level of difficulty to manage the required changes in communication style, and second one is level of difficulty others experience because of the changes in regular communication styles to accommodate. So as there is 2 items, so maximum score or maximum complexity is represented by a score 10, and minimum complexity is associated with is represented by score 2. Then the job modification or change, a complexity associated with job modification and change, it's a dimension 3 or subscale 3. So it required to manage, it required to measure, it required 6 items to measure. So because of that, the lowest score or insignificant complexity associated with job modification or change in a particular disability will be represented with score 6, and highest complexity will be represented by 30. So here I just want to give a little brief that what are the items, what this 6 item particularly focus, particularly the level of role modification required, level of difficulty to manage the modification, need for creating alternative position, a level of difficulty to create the required alternative position, level of flexibility required, and level of difficulty to manage the flexibility required to accommodation. And third subscale was resources. It was measured by 3 items. First items was readiness, level of readiness of resources required to accommodate, level of difficulty to manage funds to require purchase accommodation resources. And third one is level of effectiveness of organizational disability accommodation policies. So as I mentioned before, that as it was with the 3 items to measure the complexity associated with resources required for a particular disability accommodation, the complexity score, so if it is in if the score is 3, then it represents this complexity associated with resource is insignificant. If the score is 15, then the complexity associated with resource required is highest. Subscale or dimension 5, so social support. This dimension covered social complexity associated with social support. So we wanted to, so our statistics suggested that 4 items are enough to measure the complexity associated with social support required during disability accommodation. if the score is 4 after measuring the social support related complexity, then it will present that this complexity associated with social support for a particular disability will be low. But if the score is 20, then it will represent the complexity associated with social support is the highest. Now, complexity associated with employees' own support. This is dimension 6 or subscale 6. So our statistics suggested that the 3 items is enough for measuring employees' own complexity associated with employees' own support. As you see that the first item is a level of knowledge affected of the people with disability holds about his or her condition, an extent to which affected employees cooperate in their accommodation process, an extent to which the affected employee express their condition. So as it's 3 items subscale, so the lowest score will be 3 and highest score will be 15. That means that if you apply this scale and if you for this dimension and the score is 3, then the complexity associated with employees' own support is insignificant. But if the score is 15, then you have to be very careful, because it shows that the complexity associated with employees' own support is very serious. So manager supervisability, we measured it with 3 items. So it means that if the score is 3, then the complexity is lowest, and if the score is 15, then the complexity associated with very high. The next subscale is disruption. So 2 items were enough to measure this one based on our statistics, and score 2 represents that the complexity is lowest, and score 10 shows that complexity is highest. And the last dimension was a complexity associated with complex nature of the disability. So in that case, so our statistics suggested this 3 items were enough to measure this complexity. Score 3 will be representing the lowest level of complexity, while 15 score will be representing highest level of complexity. So this is the total score. So in our scale, we had 9 dimensions or subscales. That if you want to apply fullest for a certain situation, then the lowest complexity score will be 29. That means that it's insignificant. And if you see that it touches 145 score, then you have to be very careful. This is a devastating situation that should take special care. So the score for this complexity scale will range from 29 to 145 with a median score of 87. However, uses of the skill, I know that all disability is unique and different. So maybe all the 9 dimensions will not be applicable. So if you go for full application, you have to apply all 9 dimensions with 29 skills, and the lowest score will be 29, and highest score will be 145. But you can use the partial dimension. For example, if you have someone has some sort of reduced physical abilities, so you do not need to use all the dimensions. Just use the dimension that is applicable and based on the score. For example, if you use 2 dimensions and that are associated with 5 items, so lowest score or insignificant complexity will be represented with by the score 5, while the highest level of complexity will be represented by 25 score. So you have to interpret and apply the results accordingly if you go for partial application. Now, this is a statistical scale validation. I wanted not to go excuse me, I wanted not to go for in-depth analysis. So in fast so it means that whether our scale is statistically sound. So to do it, so we arranged we conducted 3 studies, so that we can do best from our side to make that it's statistically sound and it's applicable in the current situation. So in first study, we interviewed in a qualitative study 335 supervisors with recent disability experience, and in quantitative study, we checked the construct validity, reliability, and common method variance to understand that's whether the recruited participants are fine for this research, appropriate for this research. We found that the first quantitative study says that the scale fits this is statistically sound. And in the second study, we interviewed 304 supervisors with recent disability experience. And we also found that statistically the scale is considered sound, as well as the respondents fits to the research. So that means that we used the input from 942 supervisors with recent disability experience to develop this research to make it sound, statistically sound, as well as functionally sound. So next part, I wanted to discuss about functional validity of the scale. So after developing and testing the scale, we wanted to try to check that's how it works in the real world. So we tried to analyze the relationship between disability accommodation complexity and workplace variable, particularly job demands, job stress, work motivation, organizational commitment, and leader member actions with employee disability. So we found that disability accommodation complexity has increases job demands for supervisors, and disability and it also increases the stress but reduce motivation, because supervisors do this as an additional task and they go through a lot of things. And our research also suggested that complex disability reduces supervisors' organizational commitment. And finally, we found that a complex disability can reduce leader member exchange qualitatively. That means the relationship between the employee disability and their supervisor who is managing the disability accommodation can deteriorate significantly if the disability accommodation is complex. Now, in the section 6, I would give some overview that's how you can be benefited with the disability accommodation complexity scale we proposed. This scale can empower you as a manager or supervisors to assess the complexity of each disability case objectively and contribute to minimize stakeholder errors, particularly supervisors' error, by enabling a targeted decision making and reducing uncertainty, and foster disability accommodation success. Second, it will enhance awareness and coping strategy for disability accommodation cases, for managing disability accommodation cases. That means that you will make well-informed decision, not just trial and error approach that normally supervisors uses. This scale will also help identify necessary resources and social support for accommodation. It will also empower to handle complex disability effectively and avoid demandability misfit that experienced by the supervisors while they're assigned to manage a disability. Maybe it's complex or simple. And finally, it will enhance the changes of disability success. It will enhance the chances of disability success rate, as well as reduces the disability accommodation failure. So I believe that this is the last slides. Thank you so much for joining me today. And it was my pleasure to share my research experience with you, particularly the disability accommodation complexity scales, if it might be helpful for your next disability accommodation management.
Thank you so much. What a wonderful presentation with so many different facets and factors and things to think about. So as you mentioned, this process of disability, of accommodation, disability management, it is a shared process and a shared responsibility process. So what is your best practice in utilizing this tool, in the sense of, is this something that a manager and the person requiring accommodations do together? Is this with human resources? How do you see that this tool getting filled out in real time?
In real time, I would suggest the supervisor or manager, based on my perception, that first of all, it should be directed to the supervisors or managers who manages the disability accommodation in a workplace. It's not about the particularly the people with disability. They might have a little bit of participation on this, but mainly this will be assessed by the supervisors or manager. For example, if you think there's other parties, if you consider about the top management, they do not have any like interest on these one, particularly while for facilitating this disability accommodation, because it's not part of their responsibility, and most of them they wants to get rid of a lot additional responsibility. So I would based on our experiences, based on our perception, I think that this scale will be used by the supervisors. But if they need input from other stakeholders, they can definitely do another make use the triangulation with like same items, same scale they can use for interviewing them or surveying them, and they can triangulate the results with supervisors scoring to be more specific, or if they wants to find out that's to make it more efficient and accurate.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And how would you address the naysayers, if you will? As again, we've kind of seen and been shown throughout today, the accommodation process can have a perception of something that's already intensive in time and activity and effort. And this is uh, adding perhaps a step to this process. So how do you have this conversation in your workplace to take that time and implement this step to gain the benefits that you've already discussed? How can you go about that conversation?
So I know that you need to create a case and you have to get all the stakeholders on board to implement this approach. As we mentioned that disability is an underdeveloped discipline of the research, and as well as in the industry, because they're still not using the scientific approach based on facts. So the reason you should use this scientific approach, there is first of all that you will face a lot of advantages while you are planning, while you are accommodating. So if you want to justify a top management, that's why they will be on board on this. Then you can show that this is the real data, that if you do not give this supports to overcome these complexities, then the disability accommodation will not be successful. And unfortunately, you will know that there is several research that if you cannot accommodate a person in the first try, then you have to start it over again. It will increase the organization's cost. And on the top of that, there is a lot of research. You will find that if time passes, particularly the 3 months, if person is away from the work because of their disabilities, their return to work or being accommodated rate drops by 35%. But in that case, this person with disability also lose a lot of money. So according to a research in Canada, I cannot refer directly. In my thesis, I found that a person with disability who loses their job because of the disability and take early retirement, they loses on an average $400,000. So it's a huge cost for the people with disability too. And on the top of that, we are living in a hyper-connected world. So if you want to justify the top management, why they would care about it, why they would be engaged from their soul and heart, that if you are you have a very good rating of disability accommodation, then it has impact in the market. So your brand will be improved. People with a good like skill, best performance in the market will be interested to come to your organization. So on the top, finally, that it's a legal obligation. So if you cannot perform legal obligation, you're going to get fined. So there is a lot of areas that you have to use more efficient and less costly efforts, that rather than doing trying a trial and error, it will increase the disability success rate, increase the return to work. It will benefit, reduce organization's cost, and it will improve their standing in the market. So there's a lot of benefit to justify that you should go for a such a robust approach. Although you see that it's a robust approach, you have to take it as a regular work, not just an additional work that we are doing. It's a mistake right now, but absolutely there is no way for the organization or stakeholders to get away with this.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. I believe you just created the business case for all of us here today on how that we can go back and have that conversation. So some wonderful points there to bring it back into the conversation. Looking at the time, we have time for one more question. And looking at, as you mentioned, this talent pool that's out there, there's a significant people with disabilities in the working market right now. And so when you look at something like a tool like this, unfortunately, we are still still battling against things like stigma, and people have perceptions of what does it mean to hire or accommodate someone with a disability. So how do you see this tool really supporting the movement towards inclusion and bringing down those barriers of accommodating those with disabilities?
Yeah, so that's absolutely good, absolutely important point. Why this skill will help. I already said that you do not, no organization can get away with the responsibility for disability accommodation. So it's a cost. It's a responsibility for the organization. It's a protected ground by the human rights law or all level law in Canada or any other countries that I mentioned. So you have to take it, first of all, you have to take it as a function of the organization, because when you are dealing with such massive amount of your demographics are people with disability, you cannot just keep them aside from your organization. So in short, that it's an important part, it's going to be important part of the organization. So I believe that this skill is going to be a great resource to make informed decision making. For example, if someone is facing a disability, for example, cancer survivor, if you just use this throughout, like physical environmental change, communication change, or job modification that is not relevant, that is not going to help, it's just trial and error, you are just trying. So when you use this approach of management as a manager in practical session, we do not have so much time like this one, we do not have so much resources for doing this, we have other things to do. So we do not have a lot of time. It will waste our time, resources, and motivation for the supervisors to motivate the employees. But if you use this complexity skill, start from somewhere, it will, first of all, it will help you to make a more accurate decision making or planning for disability accommodation. You will have all the resources because you will be able to create a case for all the parties required to participate in the process. It will be more scientific, and as you know, that if it is a scientific and procedural approach based on the fact, then the success rate will be high, so everyone associated with it will be benefited. So previously you might be doing based on a trial and error. It's bad for you, bad for the organization or the person of disability accommodation, because it can deteriorate their condition. But if you use this one, you know the reality in the ground. If it is a serious case, you will take seriously and you will create a robust plan. But if it is a very minor case, you'll be knowing that you're not in a dark. So you'll be knowing that's what you might be doing. So you'll not take additional stress, additional demotivation, or the person with disability will feel more comfortable to communicate with you. You will not be scared, because we are scared of uncertainty. So it will keep you the light on each and every cases, as it's a bigger skill, but you can use it customized way. And for every cases, we hope that it will be helping you to understand and start with a scientific and rigid process.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We are at time today. So again, thank you so much, Shahin, for all of your time and expertise and bringing this forward. Hopefully this will be a wonderful additional tool in the toolbox, if you will, in our organizations and supporting our employees with disabilities who are so important in our workforce and thriving organizations today. I'll just end with a big thank you to the audience for staying and having this time together today, as well as to Shahin for sharing all of your expertise. And I hope that everyone has a great rest of the day.
Thank you, everyone.
Continue to learn and connect with the Work Wellness Institute and see how we're transforming research into workplace performance and health at www.workwellnessinstitute.org.